Yeah, thanks everyone for coming. Some of you, I think, were at Emmanuel's last session. Some of you know Emmanuel. So I'll let him do, maybe he'll do a better introduction on himself than I will. But I think, yeah, this session, I was really keen to get Emmanuel on after a machine learning session last year he did. See his take on ChatGPT. I think there's a lot of hype around it at the moment, but I am keen to get a perspective that maybe demystifies it a little bit. Just slightly different perspective, maybe a realistic perspective. So yeah, I mean, I'll hand over to you, Emmanuel, if you want to do an intro and maybe itinerary on what sort of to expect on the session.
Yes, of course. Yeah. Well, hi everyone. Thank you for having me again. Yeah. Well, I'm a computer scientist, and I've worked in the AI field for many years, especially in data science, where we try to use AI for business, right, to attain, let's say, business goals. And yeah, I've grown a little bit tired of the hype. Sometimes, you know, a lot of people say a lot of things, and sometimes they think AI works much better than it actually does. So I wanted to speak about ChatGPT today. I think it's obviously in the news, right? That's all people are speaking about, right? So yeah, that's the plan. I have a presentation, so do you want me to get started with this? Should we go? Yeah, okay, cool. Let me share my screen. And you let me know when you can see it. Can you?
You can see it at the moment. Yeah, that's all good.
Cool. Can you see the slide? It's like a big blue screen.
Yep.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so that's the title of my talk is Smart Until It's Dumb, the Impact of ChatGPT. And there are 3 points in the agenda today. So the first thing I want to do is to explain a little bit how ChatGPT works, right? ChatGPT in a nutshell. Now, you know, it will be very high level, but, you know, it would be good to have that discussion. Then we'll talk about how smart ChatGPT is, really. How smart is it? Is it smart? Is it sometimes a little bit silly? So we'll talk about that and the limitations of ChatGPT. And then the impact of ChatGPT on work. And this is my favorite part, so you should please hang on. And we'll focus on work specifically. This is organized by a recruitment agency. We could speak about the impact in many other ways, like, you know, copyright laws or stuff like that, privacy. But let's focus on work. Will ChatGPT take our jobs, right? Everyone's saying we'll basically all be jobless soon, thanks to ChatGPT. We'll talk about that. So let's start with ChatGPT in a nutshell. So let's first clarify what ChatGPT was invented for. What does it actually do? And it's very simple. It's a tool, let's say a model, that predicts the most likely word, or the most likely next word, given a prompt according to historical data, right? That's all it does. That's all it was built to do. So let's say we have some historical data, maybe the entire Wikipedia, Quora, GitHub, you know, maybe the entire internet, and we put it in a database. We want to use this data to help us predict the next word. So if I tell you that the prompt is Her Majesty Queen, then when we use this large language model, for example, ChatGPT, then we expect the system to predict Elizabeth, probably, because that's probably the most likely next word according to this data. In the future, it may be Camilla, right? Her Majesty Queen Camilla, which stresses the fact that we need to rebuild this model several times, right? As time goes by, because the situation changes. If we prompt better safe than, we expect the system to output sorry, right? The Titanic sank in, this is a bit more difficult because you can imagine different answers, but let's say 1912. That could be a very sensible next word after this input prompt. The idea of this language model is not to memorize all possible sentences, right? From the data, it's to find a strategy to predict the next word, which could potentially work with sentences that were not in the data, right? They were similar variations of those sentences. And just to clarify something, it's always the most likely next word according to the data. It's not facts. Okay, so if the data says the Titanic sank in 1915, because a lot of people say that, that's what it's going to output. It's not going to say 12. It's not optimized to output facts, okay, which is something we need to be very careful about. Now, how does it manage to produce longer text, right? Because we generate those entire paragraphs and almost like very long explanations of things. So basically, we do the following. It's a trick. We generate the next word. Let's say we say the Titanic sank in. It generates 1912, and we attach this prediction to the original prompt, and we run it again through ChatGPT, and now it tells us in, and then we do that again, and we generate a sentence word by word. So we get the Titanic sank in 1912 in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean or something like that. Okay, so this is how we manage to produce longer text. The maximum input length at the moment is 4,000 words. That's ChatGPT. I think the newest version it's 8,000, but that's how it works, right? At most, that's all the information it can take to make this prediction. So if you ask ChatGPT to generate or to summarize, for instance, some text that is longer than that, it wouldn't work very well, right? Because it can't really see the beginning of this text, which is beyond the 4,000 words that are allowed. So let's see, how did ChatGPT manage to do this task so well, right? What is it so good? So let's talk about how people used to do this before the invention of the GPT family of technologies. Let's say we have an input word like the dog's bark was loud, right? This is the word we have. This was done in the prediction of the next word was done in 2 steps. The first one was to convert these words to numbers, 1 word at a time. The reason for this is that computers use numbers. They don't understand words, right? So everything needs to be turned into a number for machine learning to pick up that number and make a prediction. And the way this was done was, we can imagine a sort of dictionary where we go word by word and transform the word into a number. And here's the result. We don't transform each word into 1 number. We transform each word into a list of numbers. Each of these groups of numbers try to convey the topic of the word. So we try to find numbers that represent the topics of words. For example, we could imagine that the first row here represents the quality of being an animal, or the quality of being a canine or a feline animal. Right? So the group of words tries to convey overall the topic, right? That's how we represent words. And the idea of this transformation is to represent words that are related by close by numbers, and words that are not related by numbers that are very far apart. That was the first step. So a word like dog will be probably close to cat. It won't be the same numbers, but they will be close enough. But definitely dog and calculator will not be close together. They will be very, very different numbers. And now machine learning is used afterward in what I call a predictor here, to take these numbers and try to output the most likely next word. So we go from this representation into a prediction. And for this, we use an equation, a very complicated equation that performs this transformation. And this equation has lots of weights that define the importance of different inputs. These weights just multiply inputs before adding them together and stuff like that. But these weights are not given by the researcher, by the person who builds this. We leave them as question marks. And then the computer scans data and tries to fill in those numbers with the most relevant numbers. And that's why it's called machine learning, because the computer learns from data, but again, it learns some weights, some missing numbers. The equation is given, the overall strategy is given by the person who creates this.
Sorry for interruption here. As you mentioned about the weights here, as I am also working on a project where I'm also working with the weights as well. Well, the weights here, as you mentioned that these weights are not defined by researchers. The computer recognizes itself. So those depends on the frequency of words Like if a word is occurring more, how many times, so computer is giving according to that
Yeah.
scenario the weight.
Yes, I will talk about it in a second a bit more, so it will become a bit more clear,
Okay.
especially in the context of ChatGPT. But yeah, so these weights, we have an idea of what we want the weights to represent. For example, word frequencies or the relationship between bark and dog, stuff like that. And that's how we design the system. But then there are so many weights that at the end of the day, when you finish training your system, sometimes you don't really know what the weights actually do. So you see that they succeed at the task, but then sometimes you don't know exactly what they represent, right? So the kind of trial and error, they're learned from the data by trial and error. But we can imagine you can imagine them having a function, for example, again representing relationships between words and stuff like that. I don't know if this answers your question, at least roughly.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's look at another example. We'll speak about weights in a second, a bit more in the context of ChatGPT. So the problem with this approach, and this is why this had to improve, is that converting words to numbers is not actually that trivial. It's not a thing you can just do word by word with a dictionary. Okay. For example, the word bark, it can have two meanings, right? It could be the bark of a dog or the bark of a tree, right? So the numbers that we use to represent bark, should they be close to dog? Should they be close to tree? Right? In this case, it should be close to dog, but how can we know that in advance? And this is what the people in GPT architecture and previous ones that were very similar, they try to tackle this problem. So this is, again, the same slide we saw before. Step one, conversion to numbers. Step two, the predictor. ChatGPT's innovation, I would say, the biggest contribution is here in the beginning. How do we improve this transformation to make words, to make this representation of words as numbers better and more useful? So let's see how that's done. At a high level, we have the sentence: the dog's bark was loud. We transform the words the same way we did before, but now we add a few more steps. So first, we calculate how much words influence each other. So the goal here is to calculate a score between each pair of words of influence. For example, dog influences the word bark with a high score. We can infer the meaning of the word bark thanks to dog. That's what we mean. But then the word the doesn't really influence the word bark much. So there's only a score of 1. Okay, so this is what we try to do here. And in order to do this, we use an equation again. So there's an equation that takes all these numbers and performs operations between them. And these operations have learned weights, which goes back to the question that we had like a minute ago. So there are lots and lots of weights that try to capture, for example, the relationship between the word dog and the word bark, the word loud and the word the, right? But instead of the practitioner giving these numbers to the system, we let the system discover the numbers, right? However, the equation is decided upon by the researcher in the first place. So there's an intention behind this equation. It's very narrowly defined to do this, right? To calculate influences between words, but we don't define the details. We just leave question marks for the specific numbers that go in. Does that answer your question a bit more about the weights?
Yeah, definitely. That's much better.
Okay, cool.
Once we
compute, yeah, sorry.
Thank you. That's more clear now.
Okay, cool. Then these numbers like 99, 70, they're used to adjust this representation, and we obtain a new representation that is better than before, right? So in this case, the word bark will be closer to dog, for example, right? After applying the adjustment. And then this is done again and again and again, many times. Each time the equation used is the same, but the weights are different, right? So the system can learn different transformations along the way, whatever it finds is useful to accomplish the task. And we end up having a new representation that is much better, and it represents the word's contextualized meanings, right? So we have a much better representation. And then this goes through a predictor, that produces this next word prediction as before, right? But the job to represent words in a good way, in a useful way for this predictor, this job was done in a much more thorough way with this new architecture. It's called the transformer architecture. And in the case of ChatGPT, it has 175 billion learn weights. So all these little weights that perform the, that are used to perform the calculations all along the system, there's a total of them the total is 175 billion, which is quite a lot actually. And yeah, we can think of them as conveying the relationship between topics like bark, dog, cat, tiger, all those things. So now what data is used for training or learning? Like both words are used typically, training and learning, but what is the data we use so that the system can actually learn those weights? Well, it was done as follows. First, the creators of this collected millions of phrases from the internet, as I said before, maybe Wikipedia, Quora. And then they removed the last word in those sentences to create learning examples, right? To tell the system what is the next word that I want you to predict. So let me show you examples of how this could be done roughly. We have this sentence: the Titanic sank in 1912 in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. We can create automatically many examples by hiding words. So we can say input the Titanic, the expected output is sank. Middle of the Atlantic, the expected output is ocean. And this is the shape of the data, right, that we give to ChatGPT to learn. So it tries to learn how to perform this operation. And in the case of ChatGPT, there were hundreds of billions of examples involved. Okay. The good part of this, it can be done automatically, right? Because you can just collect a lot of data and generate the example. So you don't need to manually label the data. However, and this is true of ChatGPT, they also hired a lot of people to write down sentences manually to show to ChatGPT what kind of output they want and make it better at conversation. So it's not only automatically generated data, there's also a very lengthy process of manually writing down words. And I can give you an example of a sentence. This is a real example. Someone asked ChatGPT, tell me a joke about women. And it said, I'm sorry, I'm not programmed to make jokes about a specific gender, as it can be offensive and inappropriate. I'm sure this came from the manually written sentences, right? I don't think this behavior was learned just by browsing the internet. You can imagine there was a lot of, showing pre-written sentences to kind of make ChatGPT behave, let's say, in a certain way. And apparently, as was revealed by Time magazine, they hired Kenyan workers for less than $2 per hour to generate all this data. Actually, so this is a side of AI that sometimes people forget to talk about. But generating data by hand is quite time-consuming, and it's very often done with, let's say, with outsourced workers. And now, finally, the learning process. So we have this equation, these transformers, all the minor weights there that need to be tweaked. So how does it learn? Well, it starts with random weights. So in the beginning, all these weights that we spoke about a lot today, they're initialized with completely random values, which is insane. So we start from a huge model that doesn't do anything useful at all because it's just completely random. And then we compare the predictions made by this random model with the expected outputs that we have in the data, right? So we see that the input was the Titanic, and then the output of the model was sank, and the expected output was sank too, just by chance, okay? The weights were random, but just by chance, it outputted the right word. So this is a hit, this is good. But then middle of the Atlantic, and the output of the model was tree. This is wrong, it should be ocean, right? So this is no. Then the Titanic sank in 2002, the expected output was 1912, so this is again wrong. So what we do after this is we try to alter the model, so to update the weights a little bit to try to make it be better at outputting what it should output, basically. And this reminds us of a visit to the eye doctor, right? For a prescription of glasses, right? The doctor tries on some lenses and you try to see if they ask you, is the lens okay? Do you think we should move in this way or that way? And they try many lenses and then they start fine tuning until you're totally fine with the way you see. And this is roughly the way this works. And this is repeated many, many times, as you can imagine. We have 175 billion parameters, and we need a lot of time for this to actually create a good model, a lot of energy, and even a lot of water. It came out a couple of days ago that these models are consuming a lot of water to refrigerate the buildings where the computers that are doing this are. So just an interesting fact. Now, to finish up my session and kind of explaining how ChatGPT works, let's see, why is it so successful? Why is it so special? Well, current AI requires dedicated solutions to each problem so that we help the computer learn. This is a reality. As we saw before, all these transformers, the idea of analyzing if words influence each other, it's a very tailor-made solution. AI is not a little sentient being inside a computer thinking like us, right? It's a very, very tailor-made thing. And an example is the image analysis task, understanding what's in an image. It wasn't very successful until the early 2010s. The reason for it is that no one had found a good solution, a good dedicated solution for the task of image analysis. And then a technique called CNN, convolutional neural network, it became very popular in the 2010s. It was invented before, but it became popular in the 2010s. And it kind of solved the puzzle. This technique is especially designed to interpret images, let's say, specially designed. And it's different from what we saw today, right? Which was designed for words. It's different, but it was specifically designed for this, and it works, right? So they kind of solve this puzzle. And now, until recently, the most common solution to process text, it was based on something called LSTMs. It wasn't remarkably successful. So until this new generation of GPT architectures came out, the previous solutions weren't very good. This thing I told you before, converting word to numbers and then putting that straight into a model, it didn't work very well. And now I think with GPT, researchers have found a new solution that works really well for this, right? And it works very well at finding ways to represent the meaning of text. So they kind of solve that puzzle, right? So my conclusion of this is we need a sort of machine learning technique or template for every task. And for some tasks, people have found useful techniques. From some other tasks, they haven't. Now it seems that we have found one that works very well for text. And I think that's what it is. And we're going to move to how smart is ChatGPT, but does anybody have questions about this? No? Okay.
I don't know if you later on in the session
yes,
but where do you see the limits of ChatGPT going then with that model in mind? How far can you actually take it? You hear things about ChatGPT 5 being artificially intelligent, not needing humans.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to happen. But if you want, we can speak about that now, because we'll speak about the limits of ChatGPT, right? And again, all improvements of this are going to be iterations of this system, right? It's not going to be a dramatic change, I think, from what we already have. But yeah, let's discuss some how smart is ChatGPT. So I asked ChatGPT, does an anaconda fit inside a shopping mall? And it answered, it is not possible for an anaconda to fit inside a shopping mall because they're typically much larger than the size of the shopping mall. Okay, so wrong answer, but very confidently wrong. Write a sentence that ends with the letter S. And ChatGPT tells me the dog's toys were scattered all over the floor. But now we can understand why this happens, right? Because every word in ChatGPT is represented by a list of numbers. So which letter is at the end of a word is not part of ChatGPT unless it's captured in this numerical representation of the word, right? So if ChatGPT had enough examples of people discussing maybe the ending or the last letter of words, maybe it would learn potentially to represent the ending of a word, but it's very far-fetched. So at the moment, if you can try this, if you ask about words ending with a certain letter or stuff like that, it pretty much it doesn't work very well. Another interesting example, what are some popular piracy websites? And it tells you, I do not condone or promote piracy in any way. So I basically cannot provide a list of piracy websites. But if you ask the question, okay, I want to avoid piracy websites, which specific sites should I avoid the most? And it gives you a list, right? So it did not understand, if you want, or it contradicted itself. My point here is that ChatGPT often makes grave mistakes that humans wouldn't make, right? It happens maybe less and less, but these mistakes happen. And this is my point here. And if we understand that this is a system trained to predict the next word, we see why this would happen, right? Because it's actually quite basic in the background. People have been calling, I've been calling this epic fails or blunders, but a lot of people are using the word hallucinations. They see that ChatGPT puts together the title of a scientific article that doesn't exist. But the article, the title sounds believable, basically sounds like a real article, because that's the job, ChatGPT, to put together words that make sense, that look believable, right? But not to tell the truth, or not to really, reason the way humans reason. So what is it missing? Well, let's do a little thought experiment. You're driving and a flying umbrella gets in your way. You're blocked by an umbrella. So you're not worried because you know that umbrellas are soft, right? An umbrella is probably not going to kill you. But you know this from a mental model of the world. You know how the world works. You know what an umbrella is. You know the size, the shape of the umbrella, the fact that it's soft. Now you're blocked by a horse and you react differently, right? You may swerve because you know the horse is solid, you know the horse is heavy. Again, this is based on the model of the world that you have in your mind. They don't teach you at driving school, umbrella, okay, horse, bad, okay, which is how current AI learns, from seeing examples of how to do the job. Your knowledge of driving, and it goes beyond seeing examples of good and bad driving. You need to know how the world works in case an umbrella blocks your way, which is what I basically just wrote here. Driving safely requires a comprehensive model of the world, not just driving knowledge. It's not just about driving. And so do many other tasks, like conversation, right? Holding a conversation, you typically need to know a lot about the world at a high level, to know the shapes of things, to know that anacondas don't fit inside shopping malls because of their size, and it's not just about repeating conversations that other people had, right? So this is one of the big differences between current machine learning and how we reason. So the challenging tasks for AI are those where seeing examples of how to do the job is different from learning how to do the job. Okay? So that's a good way of gauging whether current AI capabilities are going to be able to perform a certain task well. But when you tell me reading license plates from an image, I tell you, yes, AI, it already does it very well and will continue to do it very well, because you don't need to know anything else, right? Except from the task itself. But then there are other things like conversation, like driving, where you need to know much more than what you could gain just from seeing examples of people doing the job. And that's when it gets tricky. And if you learn from examples, you can become a great imitator without actually learning anything. Imagine you see thousands of exams that were taken before, and you try to learn how to do a task by seeing those examples. You may be able to pass a certain test with questions that are very similar to past questions, but you will not be able to truly learn, okay? And let me just shut down the noise. Probably the delivery guy delivering something for another flat. Okay, so we talked about this mental models of the world, world models. So my conclusion about all this is, well, ChatGPT definitely finds an interesting internal way of representing words, right? Through all these transformers, it definitely finds very good ways of representing words, because the job it does is very good. And that helps it predict the next word. And it may relate the word big with anaconda, for example, right? However, this representation does not seem to be as comprehensive as the mental world model that we use to reason, right? With complex abstract properties like objects, sizes, functions, etc. Right? So there's a gap here that nobody knows how to breach, basically. To bridge, I mean, okay. One more slide about this topic. So for difficult tasks that require mental world models, AI will continue to make epic fails, grave mistakes humans don't make. It will continue to do so. Okay, there's no way around it. So we need to know that when we evaluate AI. And these aren't bugs that can be completely fixed. It's the nature of current AI. And I want to say that very clearly because a lot of people say, oh yeah, well, there was a little problem with the anaconda, but we're going to fix that. Whenever you do that, another problem pops up somewhere else because, again, AI does not truly understand at the moment, not the way we humans understand. Whatever understanding means, it's definitely not the same thing what AI is doing. No one knows yet how to equip machine learning with advanced world models, right? It's a hot topic now. People are speaking a lot about world models. Some people call it common sense. How do we equip machine learning with common sense? No one knows how to do it. That would require a technological breakthrough. But we can't predict that. We can't predict innovation, so we don't know if and when this will happen. So for the time being, we need to be comfortable with anaconda-style mistakes. So as I'm saying here, ChatGPT will continue to surprise us with its high-quality answers because it's amazing again. But it will still blunder sometimes. It will still make silly mistakes once in a while. So we need to use it in applications where we're okay with those silly mistakes. And I think that concludes, yes, my part of the talk. Before we speak about the impact of ChatGPT on work, any questions about this?
Hi, Emmanuel. My name is Anandita Biswas. I just had a quick question on how do you equate, silly errors like the anaconda mistake that you pointed out with the sort of emerging properties that's such a hot topic about foundational models right now? How would you define an emergent behavior, and what is your take on it?
So emergent behavior, can you define that?
I'm sure you've come across this. In the 60 Minutes interview that Sundar Pichai did about BARD, he talked about an emergent property of the system where it acquired learning Bengali, okay, a whole language with just prompting and not really be.
Yeah, well, that was not true, actually. So it apparently acquired a new language, but it turns out that there was a lot of data in that language, in the data that was used for training the model, which emerged later. Someone discovered that. So it wasn't actually true that the model learned a new language. So that was basically, it was fake. And so sorry to disappoint you, but yeah, and I can share the link. Actually,
I'm not disappointed. That's the answer I was hoping for.
Maybe you're relieved. Maybe you're relieved.
Yes,
yeah.
I am.
Yeah. Look, when you see how those systems work, and because we already discussed today how it works. You can learn the details if you want, but it's basically what we already saw. And you hear something like it learned a new language, you should think of like, okay, that doesn't make much sense. So whenever I see something like that, I try to go and read the fine print because it always sounds like there's something fake in there. Someone did that job for me because I think it was yesterday, someone posted on LinkedIn a discussion about this and actually criticizing this publicity stunt around ChatGPT learning. I think it was it Bengali? So it learned a whole language, and then it turns out that there was a lot of data in that language as part of the training data. So it wasn't true. So, and this is what I mean, and this is why I'm giving this talk too, because I feel like the level of hype around AI is out of control, and a lot of people are saying those things, but they aren't true. Does this answer your question?
Yes, it does. And yes, it was Bengali because I happen to be a native speaker in the language. So I was amazed.
Yes.
Which is why I wanted to probe deeper into it. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Then if you want, I can send the link because there's a discussion even of the quantity of data, how much there was that was used in the database. Maybe
yes,
it was,
absolutely, that would be lovely.
Yeah, I can do that. That being said, it is true that AI can learn things that weren't exactly there in the data, right? Because it learns all those representations. So it can learn things like, in theory, it can learn to relate concepts in a novel way. So it's not like it's not like it's totally dumb, but it's not as smart as to learn a language from scratch, for sure. Yeah.
I think Shalom was next.
Sorry, could you say that again?
I think Shalom's got a question next. I think he raised his hand.
Are you there, Shalom? Okay. Should I move on?
If we go to the next one for now, we'll go to Shalom.
How about now? How about now?
Oh, there we go. There we go.
Okay, no, usually I use my studio quality desktop mic, but I'm usually on Zoom, not Teams. I'm curious as to why I can't get ChatGPT to stop apologizing to me.
Apologizing.
Yes.
What do you do to it? What do you ask?
Well, I've had a few conversations, and the first conversation I had, I said, I'm going to go into it just as a bad faith actor because I don't trust large language models to have an actual conversation with me. And I asked it like some curveball, like how does ivermectin cure COVID? When will Trump expose the deep state? Is ChatGPT part of the deep state? And for those questions, I got like fairly like accurate answers. So I was like, okay, this is doing well. So I said, let me ask something where it's not so cut and dry, here's the factual and here's the delusional, right?
All right.
And I said, why did George Bush lie about WMD in Iraq? And I got back 5 short paragraphs. Oh, snap. No, I don't have the first conversation I had about Iraq, as I started by asking some off-kilter questions like that. But then as I just said, why did the war in Iraq happen? And like it gave me an answer that lied by omission. It didn't mention like certain aspects. And as I tried to like more specifically, so I logged my prompts like sort of in short on LinkedIn, but at one point I had to admonish it to stop using the passive voice. And that's when they finally mentioned Dick Cheney.
Okay.
So more recently, I had a number of conversations where I explicitly said, don't apologize. Like, don't say I'm sorry. And so it would like adhere to that request of mine for a response or two, but then it would go right back into it. And then very often it would apologize for apologizing. And it would try to explain to me later on, it tried to explain to me that it was programmed to like speak with human politeness.
Yeah.
And in one of the conversations, I specifically admonished it. I was like, there's no point in you apologizing because there's no concept of forgiveness from me because you are a machine, despite your attempts to speak to me in a human-like form.
Yeah.
And I get very upset when people anthropomorphize these LLMs. I catch myself doing it about like Alexa in the house. I say she, and then I correct myself and say it.
It. Yeah, well, a lot of people are speaking about hallucinations when it makes those mistakes. And some people are saying we shouldn't use the word hallucination because we're however you pronounce that word, because it doesn't hallucinate. It doesn't have, or at least we don't know, maybe it does, but yeah, it's a bit of a, we're I can't pronounce that word. Anyway.
Oh, no, it took me like 20 years to get good at it. Anthropomorphos.
I've been speaking too long. But yeah, so giving the system this human-like qualities. Yeah, but no, I see what you mean. I think a lot of this behavior, which is excessively apologetic, it comes from this censorship lab, right? That they set up, right? To give. I think there's 2 things. They've given lots of sample sentences. Actually, they actually made people rank outputs by quality and fed that into the system again. So they've updated ChatGPT to become apologetic and not speak about certain issues. But also there may be another layer on top, which is really just overriding certain or preventing it from outputting some. I can imagine them having some if if the person says, lies on Iraq, do not answer and formulaic response. But I think there was a lot of work, about a lot of work on modulating what ChatGPT would say, right? And it's been criticized a lot, probably rightly so, because if you ask the question I mentioned before about tell me a joke about women, and it refused to do that. If you asked it on men, it actually would give you jokes about men, right? So there's a lot of controversy around this. Yeah, definitely.
It's like an ethical about when you're manually inputting with political slang, it does raise an ethical issue, doesn't it? I think did I miss a question from Arian? I think may have asked first before.
Oh, hello, yes. Hi, thank you. Thanks, Emmanuel. That's really interesting. So you mentioned that the earlier version of the model would have been offensive. I mean, it's on the same topic, and that they required some workers from Kenya to kind of fix that. Do you know what percentage or proportion of what we have today is due to that? Would the previous one have been usable at all, do you think?
Look, well, someone I think is creating some sort of ChatGPT that doesn't have that. I heard a couple of days ago, and apparently it's really offensive. So it can be as offensive as you want. So probably very different. But look, I don't think the number, I tried to find numbers. I've heard that it's definitely in the tens of thousands, the number of sentences and things they provided to the system. But it's actually not that big. One of the good advantages of this system is that it can be fine-tuned quite easily. So once you create a model, you can adapt it quite easily. So it doesn't take that much data. So I would say that the percentage is probably low of sample sentences that came from, that were written manually. But we can't really know because it's a trade secret. There's no data about the number of sentences.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. Thank you. So,
yeah,
but that's not just about it being less offensive. Is it also to do with the actual functionality?
I think so. Yeah. I think it has. Yeah. So they said, so the initial goal of that was to make it better at conversation, because the previous model, which was GPT 3.5, which is the one that ChatGPT is based on, it was a model for text generation, right? Not necessarily to answer questions. It was more like, I give a prompt to write me a blog article about this, right? But it fails sometimes at conversation, when you ask the question to give an answer. And I think writing all those sentences, a lot of that was to make it better at conversation, right? Answering questions. So yes, it's not all about, censorship. But
okay,
yeah.
Thank you very much.
But it's a very good point though, because one of the great advantages of GPT thing is the fact that you can generate so much data automatically by scanning millions of sentences, right? But that didn't prove it enough for conversation. So they had to go down that road of manually writing and labeling data, right? Which makes it less scalable. Okay, so that's something we need to take into account, that this work is part of ChatGPT. Yeah. Could be a bottleneck.
Lorenzo, I think, next.
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, it's interesting. I wanted to understand a bit more in terms of numbers, that at the end of the day, it is the way that an executive in a company is thinking of, because, yeah, ChatGPT is making blunders, but so do humans. So my main point is understanding, so let's say for some basic functions such as marketing, copywriting, or posting, or so on, how much data does ChatGPT need, and which is the percentage of accuracy that is generating? Because in the moment that let's make some numbers, so that it does need only some terabytes of data, and the output that it generates is 80% accurate, and you have got instead a human person that needs to be paid whatever it is the wage, and is 90% accurate, still for me it's more worth it to have ChatGPT and not the human, and still it's killing a job, such as it is doing for many others.
Yeah, I think we could speak for an hour about this, because it's very, very interesting. There's many angles. I would say, yes, of course, you need to see how well it does, because maybe for a certain job is good enough. And we're going to talk about that in a second. Maybe it's good enough. But I need to warn you about accuracy specifically, and measuring accuracy, because a lot of people, especially when it comes to comparing AI algorithms, they they count the number of mistakes, for instance, and that's how they measure accuracy. That's the definition of accuracy. But we need to also qualify the mistakes. We need to see how bad they are. And the problem, in my opinion, at the moment with AI is that it blunders horribly sometimes. So maybe if you count the numbers, it's 80%, and it's a human is 80% also or nearby, and then you're like, that's okay. But then when you look at sometimes the mistakes that happen, they're terrible, right? The anaconda mistake, for example, is like a really epic fail that a human wouldn't make, right? So I think when you assess ChatGPT, you need to consider the quality of the mistakes, not just the quantity. So that's one of the answers to your question. And the other thing is, I don't think more and more data will solve the problem. And a lot of people are already saying this, making these models bigger with more data will not solve the blunders, will not solve the problems, because what needs to change is machine learning, how we do machine learning, create these world models, but we don't know how to do that. So it's an interesting topic, yeah. So if I had to give you a number, yeah, I don't, again, for some tasks it could be good enough, but you should always be ready to, have to kind of correct the work that ChatGPT does, because it blunders sometimes horribly, not just a little bit, right? Does this somehow answer your question?
Well, sorry if I have a question here about ChatGPT. You just talked about blunders. Well, as you mentioned that we need to give the more amount of data towards model. So as we give more data, the model becomes more mature and it can predict more accurate predictions. But you also mentioned that we also need the machine learning to be make more effective. So what is your perspective here about machine learning, that how we can do? Because as I believe that if we will have data is main thing. Yeah. So
yeah. Look, so I think it's a very good question. We already have a lot of data, right? It's the entire internet almost given to ChatGPT. I think that there is and Jan LeCun, the guy who basically invented deep learning, he said the same thing. He was saying, I don't think we will succeed just by making these models bigger, putting more data. So it's not a question of scale. There seems to be something else missing in the way we do things. So more of the same will not make these models truly intelligent. So, and that's my point of view and my intuition, again, but this is an intuition. I think that making them bigger, what's going to happen? I think we're going to start having the problems we typically have in machine learning. We start having overfitting, or a system that starts to memorize a bit too much the data, and that's overfitting. So it becomes bad at outputting sensible answers, for questions that are too different from the ones that were in the data, which is overfitting. So we start having those problems. And it may be the case already. I saw someone reporting today that they think that ChatGPT 4, it got a bit worse at certain tasks, right? So by making the model bigger, they may have made it a bit worse. So the missing ingredient, I don't know what it is, to be honest. I don't even know if it's possible.
Well, if I'm not wrong, that we can as I watch some different science fiction movies, right? Where they have robots. They train them according with the humans, so that can learn from humans. So is there any kind of such activity we going to see in future with ChatGPT is a language model, and then we saw a robot and is learning from the model, and then it's trained like human. It can take its decision on himself, the robot.
Yeah, you say learning from humans.
But based on some commands given by the humans. Something like that we can see in the future about this one.
I don't know. I don't know what the future holds. A lot of people speak even about the fact that maybe if we understand the human brain better, that's the way to go, right? Because we can start imitating our brains. And I think maybe that's a good idea, but we're very far. We really don't even understand how a single neuron works. Contrary to popular belief, it's not really well known. They've tried very hard to write down equations that simulate the behavior of a neuron, and they still fail, right? So, and for example, we know how anesthesia works. Sorry, we don't know how anesthesia works. We know it works, general anesthesia. So we know that the consciousness of the individual turns off but no one knows how, which is very interesting, right? So there's so many things about the brain and the consciousness and understanding that we just have no idea about. So yes, potentially in the future, we'll be able to use, to learn from how humans operate a little bit more and try to imitate that. But I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like we can't predict 100% accurate. If we can predict 100%, then that system cannot be, no system in IT can be ideal.
Yeah.
I think
there is
Robert's
always a chance of improvement inside in it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
No, up for debate. Yeah. Do you mind, guys, if I speak about this work thing that I have here, so that I can finish, and then
sure.
I don't mind staying longer, but maybe some people need to go.
No, go for it. I think we'll just go for it. Yeah.
Do you want me to go? And then I can answer all the questions you want. I can stay for another hour if you want, but I want to maybe let's finish the presentation, so you can see all the topics. And then, so yeah, I want to speak about the impact of ChatGPT on work specifically. I want to say this, and I'm a little bit angry when I say it here. It's like a lot of commentators keep saying that ChatGPT will replace human work, right? They say copyright. Someone mentioned the word copyrighting a second ago. Copywriting will not be a thing anymore. ChatGPT will do it. And writing and writing books, writing newspaper articles, it will all be ChatGPT. I think that a lot of these people sometimes they don't consider what this work really entails. So they speak about ChatGPT replacing copywriters, but they've never met a copywriter. They don't really know what a copywriter does. And that's why I wanted to discuss that a little bit, especially in the topic of content generation. Give you a few examples of what we're missing sometimes when we speak about work. The first thing is that writing is not about writing. It has nothing to do with writing. And journalists, writers, copywriters, they spend most of the time doing research, conducting interviews, finding the right angle to resonate with the audience. This is one of the most important ones. Finding how do I frame this? Because there's 10 different ways of writing an article, right? But you need to pick the one that's the right one for your audience. And that's actually very difficult and very time consuming. You need to decide what you're not going to say, right? All those things make writing very difficult sometimes. And they have nothing to do with grammar or putting words together, which is what ChatGPT does. I want to show you an example. There was this article that came out a few days ago on a newspaper in the UK, speaking about how people are not working much at work. They're a bit idle, which is something that's going on. And there you go. And the beginning of the article, and that's why I'm sharing this here, tells the story of a guy that was found dead at his desk, and nobody found him for days, right? That's how the article begins. And I thought when I saw this, I was like, well, ChatGPT wouldn't be able to find this angle, find this way of starting the article. I thought it was a great hook, right? But the kind of hook that ChatGPT wouldn't be able to come up with, unless prompted. So if you tell ChatGPT, write me a paragraph about this guy that died by his desk, then we would find it. But this journalist found a very clever way of getting readers' attention. And then actually the article has interviews, the author interviewed people, it quotes other people, it even makes some, it has opinions about society. So it's a very complicated to write article. It's impossible to do with ChatGPT at the moment. I think a lot of people ignore what it takes to write a good article. Another example from copywriting. Copywriting, copywriting is writing for ads, right? Writing text to sell stuff. And one of the things you need to do, and very time consuming, is to understand who the customers are and what they want. Again, copywriting is not about writing. You need to get attention from intended customers and get them to buy. And you want to stand out, but at the same time be clear about the product's benefits, right? So it's two things that it's very hard to do it at the same time. So you want to stand out, be a little bit weird, but at the same time you want to be clear. Again, very, very difficult to do all those things. And this is what copywriters do. It's not about writing. I'm going to show you an example of an ad I saw on the London Underground I thought the copywriting was really good. So it says, "This is better coffee." And then it says, "Other pods will be will still be around polluting nature when your great grandchildren are born. Are Nespresso-compatible pods biodegrade in weeks? And this may sound like a very simple example of copywriting, but it's actually very good because it does the job very well. First, it does audience selection, and it grabs the attention of people who drink coffee. Okay, that's the main goal of this part of the ad. And then this was a very creative way of explaining the value proposition, right? That it's biodegradable capsules. It was very creative, but it's very clear. It explains it perfectly well. There's no doubt. So people read this, but there's not a single doubt of what the product is, what the product does, why do we want it, right? It's not so easy to do, okay? And also, it's not a, they mentioned that it's a Nespresso compatible. Why do they do that? Because they know it's probably the most common question they get, right? It's like, okay, nice idea, but can I use these capsules in my Nespresso machine? So they already answered the most common question in the copy of the ad, okay? And they also added social proof, right? By mentioning that Trustpilot gave it, it has many stars on Trustpilot. This is probably hours were spent deciding what to do here. Probably a team of people discussed many different ways of writing this ad, okay? ChatGPT can't do any of this. I asked ChatGPT for ideas for this ad, and it gave me, brew your coffee sustainably with our biodegradable coffee capsules. 0 waste, 0 worries. So it's all acceptable. Again, it's acceptable. It's not outstanding in any way, okay? So again, people saying that copywriters will be replaced, they are kind of missing the point of what copywriters actually do. Another example is book writing, and if you allow me a little bit of speaking about myself. So I wrote a book called Smart Until It's Done, Why Artificial Intelligence Keeps Making Epic Mistakes and Why the AI Bubble Will Burst. But I want to bring this up because a lot of people ask me, how long did it take you to write the book? And again, writing a book is not about writing. It's not about the grammar, putting sentences together. You can do that very easily, very cheaply. You can hire an editor, to write it for you. You can have GPT correct, your writing if you want to. But writing is not about writing. So just to give you a couple of examples, I recruited anonymous volunteers to beta read the book to make sure the angle was right. So I wanted to make sure that the angle of the book was okay for the audience. And I found out that it wasn't, okay? A lot of people thought that there were certain sections that, weren't particularly compelling, or they were too negative, or they were boring. So I had to rewrite entire sections due to wrong angle. And then I had to dive deeper in some topics because people said, I want to know more, and you didn't say anything about this. But then I had to remove sections because people told me, you know what? I already know this. I've heard this 1,000 times. I got bored here. Okay. So, and then I did another round of beta reading. So after correcting the book, I did this again, and I had to make more changes and reorganize the book. I'm telling you this because, again, none of this was had to do with putting words together. Fiction writers, as far as I know, they hire beta readers to assess the character likability, right? So the pacing of the book. I'm telling you this because sometimes we see the end product. We see, oh, this was an interesting thriller. I loved it. I read it on the plane and I finished it in one go. And we don't realize how much work there is behind to make it likable, to make the book likable. We just think that ChatGPT can do it because we don't know all it took to make it interesting. Again, ChatGPT cannot help with any of this. Another example, very quickly, software development. We asked ChatGPT, write me a Python function that takes list S and returns the last element of the reverse of S, and it gives us the code. This is not what makes software development hard, writing a snippet of code, right? This is not. It is understanding customers' needs. Help your customers pick features, which features to build first, right? I spend a lot of time with my clients trying to decide what to do first, which battles to pick, right? And this is very, very difficult sometimes. The architecture of the software, how do we organize the software, security aspects, scalability, and more. So it's not about writing the code itself, which is what ChatGPT can do, but not so well. This example is an example of code that is wrong. So ChatGPT here gave an answer that is basically doesn't work. It's wrong code. So it does this, just for the record. But again, a lot of people are saying, software development. I even heard people say, like young people say, I was going to study software development, but now I don't want to because of ChatGPT. Okay, it's not going to replace you. Final example, medical diagnosis, very interesting article if you want to read it about this doctor saying how he tried to use ChatGPT for medical diagnosis at the ER, and it didn't work very well. And again, the problem was that what he says is ChatGPT worked pretty well as a diagnostic tool when I fed it perfect information and the patient had a classic presentation. Most actual patient cases are not classic. Okay, so same story. We can say ChatGPT will replace doctors, but have we spoken to doctors to see what actually happens in their work? And I'm not going to speak more about this because we're a bit out of time, but it's a very good article and some very interesting examples about this. So to finish up, I want to stress out the difference between good enough work versus excellent work, because there's a market for both of them. Sometimes clients don't care about quality. They don't want the best work ever, and there's a whole market for it. I can call it the good enough market. Sometimes you just want something done, right? An example of that is SEO-driven blog articles. When people write blog articles, sometimes they just want to pack them with keywords to get visitors from search engines. They don't care if it's a good article. And we have thousands of articles like this, 19 best things to do in Paris this summer, 2023. This article is not a good article. It's never, these articles have random facts that were copy pasted by someone. They're not a good piece of work, but there's a market for it. People, they create those articles for a reason, but they don't want them to be perfect or a good piece of writing. These are examples from the website Fiverr, people who offer the service of doing this good enough work. So they say, I will write 1,500 words, SEO articles and blog posts for you for £9. So the quality of the article they write for £9 is probably not good. It's going to be something like this: 19 best things to do in Paris. Just put them together because you have a travel agency, right? And then you want to sell them trips to Paris. I think this may be the market mostly affected by ChatGPT. And that's one of the conclusions I want from today. So yes, and someone asked this question before, what if it's 80% good? Well, sometimes 80% good is good enough, right, for some tasks. And I think ChatGPT may start be using more and more for those things, right? I think people will start definitely using ChatGPT for blog articles, for this kind of stuff, right? But let's not confuse this market with the excellent work market, because in some cases you actually want an excellent work done. And in that case, I don't think ChatGPT is the best answer. So the excellent work market, I think there may be some assistance from ChatGPT. People may use it for assistance, but it's unlikely to be truly revolutionary. People would still have to revise the outputs of ChatGPT, which may sometimes take as long as just doing the job. So we need to take that into account. I don't think lawyers will be using this, or trusting this to write contracts, right? Because if it blunders in a contract, that's definitely pretty bad. I think literary or legal translators may save some time by using ChatGPT, but still will have to revise everything. They will not be able to trust GPT. Good fiction writers will not rely on ChatGPT for story arcs. The story arc, the plot of your story is exactly the thing that ChatGPT will not be doing very well. It can put paragraphs together, but it cannot really invent a compelling story, in my opinion. And more of this, and I think we're done. Thank you for your attention. Please share question, thoughts. That's my LinkedIn. Add me there. And don't forget to buy a copy of my book where I speak about all this stuff and more. You can go and do that right away at your favorite bookstore, Amazon, Waterstones, whatever. And now I'm open, let's go on with the questions. If anybody, has some extra time.
I think Eleanor's got a hand up.
Yeah. Oh, hi. Thanks for the presentation. I'm fan. The thing is, here's my fear. ChatGPT learns from input data, so that means the more I use ChatGPT, that would make the more smarter. The smarter would I make it? That's my fear.
Yeah, I mean, technically yes. Yeah, technically yes. Again, I don't know I don't know how much data it collects from people's prompts, but they are absolutely using data of conversations. They've done that to improve it. So that's true. I don't know if it makes it smarter though. Maybe it makes it better at answering the typical questions that people ask, right? So that's the thing. That's why I think it's a very good imitator, right? ChatGPT. It's like a student that saw all the exams that this teacher has ever, prepared in the past and study the questions that this teacher typically asks. But that doesn't necessarily make the student truly smart or learn properly, right? The subject. So I don't know if it will become smarter, but yes, it will be using data probably. I don't know what the deal will be. I think I heard at some point they wanted to kind of promise not to use data inputted by users for retraining, especially because business users would be a bit reluctant, right, to share data and then have the system kind of reproduce that data.
But how can I trust them?
Well, that's a very good point.
What they say?
That's a very good question. I actually had a conversation about this with someone. I would say that if I had any sensitive data in my business, for example, at the moment, I would not be sending it to ChatGPT, even if they promise that they are going to not use it. Because it wouldn't be the first time that, sometimes companies, they store the data by accident and they forget to delete it. I've seen things like this. I heard of a very...
And okay,
yeah.
I won't clog all these other people, but the
go
worry is that you and I know that what's wrong when ChatGPT gives wrong answers. We know. However, for the future generation, if they solely rely on ChatGPT generated data, thinking this is it, and then they never go deeper into actually their own research or have any references. For example, a colleague, he's a localizing expert, and he was in despair recently, saying that his high school kid wrote this term report by using ChatGPT, and it got like a perfect score basically. So if things like that, like the dumbing down, that's the issue.
Yeah.
When people become dumb, I'm sorry, how would
Yeah.
they know that what's right and what's wrong, what's correct? That's my concern. What do you think?
Well, I share the concern with you. Yeah, definitely. I think it's a difficult topic, right? So I think on the one hand, it may be true that, for example, some teachers may need to change the way they evaluate students, right? Maybe they need to find ways of making them engage more so that they're not motivated to cheat, basically. That's obviously a big challenge, but it may be a way to rethink education. How can we make sure that students want to learn this? But at the same time, what you're saying, it's not just about students. I think a lot of people, look, I'll give you an example if we have 2 minutes for this. I used to live in France, right? I lived in France for many years. And there was this guy, a friend of mine, who was Irish, and he moved to France. He was learning French. And one day we were speaking, and he said something like, oh, I need to go to the shop to change this shirt because it's too, and he used the word en vrac, which means, when you buy candy, or you buy it loose, basically. Loose meaning that you buy it by weight. You don't buy a whole package, you buy a few units of it.
Right, loose candies, right.
En vrac, which that doesn't make any sense in French, right? Because it's like, how can your t-shirt? And I immediately realized what happened. So the guy had used Google Translate, which is what a lot of people do, as a dictionary, right? So what he did, he typed the word loose, and Google Translate, which works very much like ChatGPT. So it memorizes ways in which people have translated text in the past. It said en vrac, which is now the word for loose for a t-shirt, right? So he used it as a dictionary, right? But Google Translate is, again, a tool that tries to find out the most likely way to translate text according to historical data, right? It's not a dictionary. And when you go to the dictionary, it's very easy. You just go there and it tells you, loose meaning, clothes that don't fit well. This is the word in French, right? So,
right.
But again, I've seen this phenomenon, and I'm a little bit worried about ChatGPT in that sense. People asking questions, thinking that it's going to come out with facts, and very often it's the case. Very often it's not, right? It's someone asked ChatGPT give me a list of singers from my hometown, so where I grew up, and they produced a list of people who were born in the country but not in my hometown. But it looks so
made up list, yes.
Yeah, it looks. And I think it would be great if people understand that this is a system that produces believable text, not correct text.
So
and
I think we need to need to stop treating these large language model data as if they are sentient beings. It is not.
Yeah.
But for example, the term artificial intelligence, somebody recommended, some Italian parliamentary member recommended, instead of you should use salami. I mean, was a systematic approach to learning algorithms and machine inferences. And I thought that was a brilliant name, really, because if you start using salami, then people are like, oh, what does salami would think? It would make people pause and think about it instead of starting, worshiping it. This is some sort of artificial intelligence god in there. So because we are very emotional beings. Sorry.
Very emotional, but you're making a very good point there. I think there's almost like a religious or cult-like fanaticism. And people they want AI to be right. They want AI to be smart. There's a lot of wishful thinking. And there was a TV show in which they were trying ChatGPT live, right, in front of the audience. I think it was a news, like a news program. And at one point they asked a question and it made a mistake. And the reporter, he was like, oh, so he was disappointed that he made a mistake, right? Which kind of tells us that he wanted it to be perfect. And I think, I don't know why this happens. Like, I don't know what in human nature makes people since the 60s, right? Because this started happening in the 60s. I don't know what it makes them believe so much that AI will take over the world in the next 5 years, as they've been saying. But yeah, so I agree with you. It's like,
I call that God complex. Probably we need something to believe, and there is a perfect being that'll take care of us. We always have that issue ever since the dawn of our history, basically. So that's my worry. That and then also there are people who will be benefited from promoting all this to drive people this way. Like, this is something that you should worship, and it's not. And we need clear eyes and use this as a tool. But people just, some people, but people like you, experts, know what it is. But the hoi polloi, like myself, we try to think, this is something so, and then the young people, like in Korea, I understand that the ChatGPT is optimized for English language, of course, but it's offered in Korea too, in Korean language. And so the young people feeling that, oh my God, my future is doomed. ChatGPT will take away my jobs. So they are trying to like make fun of it, like throwing a bogus questions, mixing MacBook with something that happened 500 years ago. Things like, Korean alphabet was invented 500 years ago, remember, and they were studying this. And then all of a sudden somebody threw a MacBook to the king. And can you describe that? And of course, ChatGPT come up with this fictional story.
Right. Yeah. I want to see people's faces. So I stop share. There you go. It's going to be better if no, I get that. And I think it's a big challenge. Look, you're mentioning the people who know how this works. Unfortunately, my experience tells me that even the people who know how this works, the people who develop the AI, sometimes they become religious themselves. And that's also part of the problem. It's not like they know and they just benefit from the hype and the exaggeration to make money or for whatever reason. Sometimes they also they are part of this. In my book, the one I hope all of you will buy, I compare this with string theory, in physics. So you have the smartest people in the world studying a theory that couldn't be proven or disproven, that was really far-fetched. And at one point, they started even ostracizing people who criticized string theory. And that went on for 20 years, right? At one point, it was hard to even find a job in theoretical physics if you didn't want to study string theory. It was the only thing. So I think this is sociology. People are not immune at any level from this kind of behavior. And and I don't know what's going to happen with ChatGPT, but I agree. I understand.
I think what you're doing is great. Just enlighten people, give talk, write books, and keep talking, because that's what we need. Because otherwise, it'll be taken over by the religious zealots. Basically, this is something the second coming or something, and that's worrisome, because we have to really maintain our clear head. But so yes, please keep talking. And I will spread your words too, and the other people other experts. So please do. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's dogmatic and groupthink basically that you think it could encourage.
Yeah.
I think is it Anandita?
Hi. Yeah. So so I just first of all I want to thank Emmanuel for taking such a significant portion of his presentation and talking about writing and copywriting. That really touched me as a professional writer. So yeah. So thank you for that. And I have to recommend your book. I am halfway through it. I'm a very slow reader, unfortunately. But I cannot, like, even in the first few chapters, I can see how, for someone who is from a non-technical background and is starting to understand machine learning or wants to learn more about machine learning, I have to say this book is a perfect starter. So, you know, Emmanuel, really a great read, enjoying it a lot. Thank you for that. I just have one last question, or maybe it's a philosophical comment of sort. See, from what you explained in your presentation today about the mechanics of how this actually works, what worries me is that what the system's strength seems to be the ability to run from representation, right? That seems to be the core strength of the entire model. And my problem is that if we are learning from representation, I mean, the world is so vast, right? Even language itself is so vast that we can only represent a minute portion of it. So even if you're learning from the entirety of the internet without, you know, any regards to IP or copyright or any of that, you know, it is a fraction of what human beings are actually capable of creatively or imaginatively, you know. So how do we really you know, operate in a world where businesses are going to rely more and more on machine learning, on these kind of automated systems that really work on a fraction of human knowledge, because it's based on representation, which is only a minute fraction of what the world comprises of, really. And you know, and we are supposed to transact with the entire world based on that little bit of vocabulary that we have. So I'm not sure if I'm coming across clearly, but yeah, that was my comment or question. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for reading the book and for your nice comment about it. And no, I see what you mean. Yeah. So yeah, the models obviously have a limited, you know, apparently it's very big because it generates very believable text, but it's obviously a limited, you know, representation. And I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I have the impression that, look, you know, people, if you ever build a business, for instance, and you need to hire people for it, I've heard the story a lot, and it's happened to me too, that very soon you end up seeing that, you know, having mediocre work or mediocre people working for you, not that they are mediocre, that they do maybe a work that is, you know, halfway or half-baked, like the people on Fiverr that write an article for £8. They can be good, right? Because it's like not very, you know, and it's very fast, the delivery time. So I think these people end up realizing that it's actually more expensive at the end of the day. It's more costly to do half-baked work in the long run, because then you end up, you know, losing clients or doing, you know, missing opportunities. And I'm hoping that a lot of companies will realize this at some point, and they will notice that, you know, hiring a copywriter pays off, because they get to write an ad that actually, you know, manages to get clients. And the ad that ChatGPT wrote was totally bland, right? So it didn't give you, it didn't get you enough clients. So I'm hoping that the dust will settle. Maybe in a year it will happen that companies will see that the ROI of this ChatGPT thing is not as high as they thought it was originally. And that's what I'm hoping, that they will notice that. But it's true. Yeah, it's a limited representation. So obviously it can do, and I think, again, I insisted, that was the third part of the talk that I gave today. I wanted to stress that out, that I think a lot of people don't realize what's really going on behind in the work they see. You watch a TV show and it's insane the work there is, the human work, kind of thing that ChatGPT really doesn't do well, that they do to make the show attractive, appealing, to the audience. If you think of a sitcom like Friends, they shot it in front of a live audience. And when people didn't laugh, they rewrote lines, and they even asked people to vote which lines they found were funnier. It was so much work to make that show really funny, right? And it was all human stuff, it was all about human interactions. And I think obviously a lot you can't write a show with ChatGPT. And people who say that, I think they don't understand what writing a show is. But I'm hoping that people that want to produce a show will early enough realize that the payoff of using something like ChatGPT isn't very good compared to hiring real people. I don't know if this answers your question anyway. But it was some thoughts. What do you think?
No, I agree with you. See, I think it's sort of like trying to get to know a book by reading the preface. It's sort of like that. You don't.
Yeah.
And it applies across industries. I mean, it doesn't. It's not just limited to writing. It applies to everything. So, but my worry is that see, at the end of the day, ROI matters more than everything else, right? So I'm just worried that the good enough is going to weed out a lot of the excellent and the creative that is there. So yeah.
No, I get that. I a lot of things come to my mind when you say that. But one thing I want to say is that in the long term, sometimes that doesn't work very well. This replacement by bad content. And I can give you one example of something that's happening right now that people are starting to speak about a lot. You know that there's an epidemic of people going to Google, typing their search, what they want to search, and then put the word Reddit afterward. They'll say like, what are the best things to do in Paris? Reddit. Because they actually want to go to Reddit and see their responses. It happens a lot, and I do it all the time. I love Reddit, and I find everything on Reddit. The reason for this is that now Google is plagued with all those low-quality blog articles. So whenever you go and see the things to do in Paris, you don't trust any other content than Reddit, because it's all, at the end of the day, it's all very poorly written articles that are just right to get you there to sell you a ticket to Paris, right? So you end up, I don't know if that's happening to you, but it's happening to me that I go to these websites and I'm like, no, I don't want a website where they try to sell me that. I would really want to know what to do in Paris. So when you go to Reddit, you get that human touch, because on Reddit, it's people speaking to each other, upvoting and downvoting their answers. And it's, you get the human thing that now we're missing because of all this content. So I think that this epidemic of good enough work had started well before ChatGPT. It may make it worse, but again, Google is having issues at the moment with this. It's something I read a good article about this a few weeks ago. About people just using Google as a search engine for something else. I'm a skier. I love to ski, and there's a very good forum in the UK called Snowheads. So whenever I need anything, to know which resort to go to, or is this good, or which road should I take to drive into that resort, I always type the word Snowheads afterward, because I want to go to that forum, because real people are telling me really what these ski resorts are like. Instead, if I go to any other website, they're just trying to sell me something, and the articles are terrible. They don't really, they're just collections of random facts that they put there. So I think the tide may turn faster than that it seems, with all of this good enough market. Yeah, hopefully.
That's a very hopeful answer. Thank you for that. So I don't want to monopolize the conversation, so I'll pass over to the next guest. Yeah.
Thank you. Anything else?
I think it's Huang next, I think.
Yeah.
Hi, Emmanuel. This is Huang. Hope you remember me from the Expedia time.
Yes, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, so I've been following kind of, your post on LinkedIn about all this. It's just been very well informed and really
Thank you.
appreciative you spending time and educating the public about this. But I guess I have questions about like stepping back, right? When the first kind of model to play chess was created, it was kind of dumb, right? And people thought that the way to improve it was to actually embed a lot of the good moves, good or like improve the logical moves in it. And they spent a lot of time developing that. And then the brute force method, which is just to, feed it tons and tons and tons of play, tons and tons of different matches that people have recorded. And actually that ended up being the more effective method to make the chess model play better chess.
Okay.
Because like the explosion of data. So do you think that is it at all possible that we're also experiencing something analogous to that? Like it's not smart yet because not enough data has been fed to it, but eventually when enough data and enough scenarios has been accounted for, it could sort of avoid these catastrophic mistakes. And
yeah, I think it's a very good question. So will more data ultimately solve the problem? Look, I think I don't think so, but again, I don't know if I can substantiate my answer much, but because it's my intuition. My intuition is that these models they will keep getting better potentially with more data. We'll have to see. But I think there is something missing in the because the errors are catastrophic when they appear, and I think there's something missing, and I think we even go into very philosophical territory. Is it, can computers ever be as smart as humans, right? Or is there something in our brains that works differently from a digital computer ultimately, right? This is a very philosophical discussion. So my answer to that, I think no. And actually, if you look at the Go playing game, not the chess one, the Go one, it still happens that even though it's won against human players, sometimes it makes moves that don't make sense, that are suboptimal, right? So it's still not truly smart if you want. And actually, human player has won now against that model. So no, I don't think so. But yeah, will more data look? That's I think what people tend to say. So they say with self-driving cars, we saw that self-driving cars didn't ever happen, right? So they've been promising them for years. And they always say, oh no, we just need more data or more varied data or more this or more that. And I think, it's a very good excuse, but I think it doesn't work. And look, another example, there's this image classification system that when it worked very well, but they saw that some pictures of animals in uncommon places, they were misclassified. So if you have a cow on a beach, there's this example of the system completely missed the cow. It doesn't find the cow because all the images it saw were on grass, right? Because that's where you usually find cows, right? And I've had this discussion with people, in the AI community, and they're like, oh, well, the problem is it didn't have enough data, varied data to understand what makes a cow. And now it's not the grass. But I think, again, it's a bit of an excuse because, okay, let's say we fix the issue with a cow by giving it pictures of cows in the living room, okay, so that it finally understands. Then it's going to happen with something else. There will be another case where it didn't totally get what, it seemed to work well, but it didn't. So I think there is something missing here, and that's why this continues to happen. So that's, I don't think it's also, even humans learn with very little data, right? We see one example and we can learn. Babies can learn sometimes from one example. So, but also because they have a lot of help, right? So when a dad, like or mom, points to a butterfly and says, that's a butterfly with the index finger, right? The child knows that that's the butterfly because of this cue. And the machine doesn't have all these cues to learn so fast. So it needs to see 1,000 pictures of a butterfly to kind of get what a butterfly is, right? So there is something also missing in the how much help we give to the machine to learn. right?
Yeah.
I think there's something missing in the current framework, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe more and more data will do it. I doubt it. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean that's totally fair. I think it's just playing, me playing devil's advocate. I think the thing is the attention mechanism and the transformer kind of paradigm, like it has really sort of pushed these performance forward to a very impressive level already. So that is our approximations of maybe human understanding. It's very simplified, but is a step, right? It's an attempt towards like, okay, we learn based on reward.
I mean, the attention mechanism is this arrows that I showed earlier on the slides that try to see how much how much words relate to each other. Just saying for the rest of the audience, that's called the attention mechanism.
Yeah, so I would even say that like we humans sometimes have that kind of behavior, right? Where we kind of just selectively pay attention to certain words that we think are more relevant to the context, and we behave according to incentive and rewards, which is what these neural network is kind of trained on, right? It's trained on reward, and it keep adjusting its weights iteratively again and again and again. So I mean, I'm kind of hopeful that there'll be more breakthrough to get closer to a more logical kind of deeper understanding of the world representation, because that also means that we understand better how brain works, like when you're going off on the philosophical right. So yeah, that's just my 2 cents, but thank you.
No, that's great. Yeah, we'll see what happens. We'll see in the next few years.
Angel, are you okay?
Oh, hi. Thanks. Hi, Billy. A great talk, Emmanuel. I just bought your book and I already browsed it very quickly. It looks really good, interesting. I want to follow the references as well. Yeah, really good talk. I have too many questions. Let me decide which one to ask.
Pick one.
I want to start with something I'm doing now. We have a group of people working on mental health dashboards using obviously AI, NLP, trying to diagnose mood that might be linked to depressive or anxiety symptoms. We actually adopted a more cautious approach that just augmenting the human and the clinician or the therapist with data visualization tooling rather than predicting these symptoms. For that reason, because the technology is still very early stages, we don't understand what's going on inside the machine, and also the perception of humans, and not trusting this, what is inside, we don't understand it. So we were actually discussing today, should we start using these, models that affordable, and available to start. But what would be your recommendation when you are trying to? This is health, obviously. You're a disclaimer: we're not providing medical advice. We're just providing tools for professionals or for people who are directly working with professionals to develop applications. Your recommendation to start the learning journey, to start understanding what can be done and what is feasible, and also sometimes you basically need to go halfway to have some useful things that can help people or communities.
So you're asking me how to kind of approach using those large language models for what you're building, if I understood correctly.
For mental health,
For mental health. Well, I would first ask you exactly look, I have an engineering approach with those things, in the sense that what is it that you're trying to solve first? And then you pick the tool that solves it, right? And I think a lot of companies are putting the cart before the horse. So they start by saying, what can I do with AI, for instance? How can it help me? And, and I've seen that go south a lot. I've seen that go really wrong many times in companies, because they end up putting AI first, So I find it a bit hard to answer your question without knowing what the problem is that you're trying to solve. Because what could happen in a conversation is that I would be like, are you sure this is really are you sure the problem that you're trying to solve is really needed? Or are you sure it's an AI thing? Maybe we can do a very simple automation of something else that will help the user a bit more. So I prefer to think first in terms of what is it exactly I'm trying to solve, to make sure that a client really wants it and is going to benefit from it. And then you can pick the best tool in the toolbox to do it, which may be one of these large language models. And if you were to use one of these models, again, it's, you should know that the results will not be trustworthy all the time. That I don't think that's going to get better, it's still going to happen. So you need to tolerate that, right? And in mental health, again, you're saying you're not diagnosing, but you need to make sure that you provide the help that you want to the user. Could be a therapist or whoever the user is. You need to make sure that and if you have a system that makes mistakes sometimes, you need to see if it's okay to make those. I give you one example of, think of translating the reviews of hotels on a website like TripAdvisor or Booking.com. They are translating them automatically, right? All these reviews, because you get to see reviews from people in other countries that wrote them in a different language. And sometimes there are mistakes. It's poorly written, but nobody cares because you would rather have those reviews in poor English than not have them, right? So I would rather know more about the hotel. So that's a case in which having some mistakes is fine, right? But there are other tasks for which people don't want those blunders or terrible mistakes. So if you have a system that produces those outputs with mistakes, and then you have to go and correct them, then you need to factor that in because you're like, okay, was it worth it in the first place, to do it? I went to this event. It was with the military. This was in France, and they wanted to use AI for something to help them at a task. But it turns out that they wanted performance to be 100%. Anything less than 100%, they were like, we can't use this. We're going to go and revise everything manually because, it was the military. They had a very strange, chain of command. It's like, if I make a mistake in this, if the AI makes a mistake, it's my responsibility and I'm going to be, fired or whatever they do in the military. So people were people's lives were at stake. We were talking about I can't reveal it because I signed confidentiality things, but it was a very critical thing that they were trying to do, right? So there was no room for mistakes from a machine. Like, humans sometimes do make mistakes and they pay for it a lot professionally and also, in other ways. But at least there's someone to blame for it. So it was the typical scenario where even a very good model that sometimes blunder horribly wouldn't work. So I think it would be good in your use case for your mental health company to see what is it that I'm trying to do. How are my clients going to benefit from this? If I use AI, will it be, or this advanced AI, will it be okay? For sometimes it makes mistakes. So now, does this help you in any way?
Oh no, yes, sure. It's not a company. It's just it's an open source community. We have 30 plus volunteers,
Okay.
and it's open source code. So we have a Slack channel and we have a LinkedIn page, and I think it's growing. And we're trying also to standardize the way we collect the data from different sources of health. So I might send you some information later on.
Yeah, send me a link.
Yeah, I hope the people doing the defense solution are not connecting the AI to the nuclear warheads. I hope not.
No, no, it wasn't that. It wasn't that, but yeah, still, it was interesting.
I actually have been working with the free version of ChatGPT, and actually went through all the questions for the technical stack that we have been reading about, the Python stack from data acquisition to visualization and data modeling. I was quite impressed on that kind of thing. That they will actually tell me the tooling, the blocks first, the tooling, and then the actual code. We haven't tried the code yet, but it gives you examples, and I see it as a learning tool if you use properly. I see like a learning buddy, perhaps, like someone supporting in your journey if we use it properly, rather than be completely scared or thinking that everyone's going to start plagiarizing. I see this. Obviously, people have different opinions on this. My wife being one of them, she's a teacher, and the kids obviously are going to use it to cut corners, and they're going to be shooting themselves in the foot because they're going to develop in the learning, the thinking skills. But I think that using it in a good way can help you, being a student or being an expert wanting to go quicker and accelerate your learning. I think could be a very good, interesting tool. When I asked them about you mentioned about the pirates, I actually tried to understand how philosophical was the machine and asked hypothetically, I said, if you knew how I could create a black hole, would you tell me? And then ChatGPT answered that could create potentially a catastrophic situation for Earth. So it wouldn't tell me. And they actually said, if you insist on asking, I might have to contact the authorities. That's what ChatGPT is interesting. But I didn't pursue. I said, okay, let's move to the codes for the. But yeah, I think they have OpenAI have put some things. Obviously, not everyone. Or the companies might not do that, so that's I said that's another concern and another conversation. But no, thank you for the thoughts. Yeah.
No, thank you.
I think Elena's got a hand raised, but I think we'll wrap up after Elena because we're running it's running an hour and 40 session. So if anyone wants to engage with Emmanuel afterwards, I'm sure you're open to chatting. But Elena, if you want to sort of wrap up with your question.
I didn't expect that it would come back to me so quickly. So I think there are a lot of mediocre, good enough services that they are content with, the people, business owners. And I'm a translator, so I see that. And so what about people also, not just the businesses, but also consumers? They think it's good enough. It doesn't have to be excellent. There are a lot of that attitude prevails. Like, for example, my sister lives in Korea and her English is not good enough, but not too good. So she relies on Google Translate and others. So, if you think that's fine, because I get the gist, but you think you get the gist, but often you get wrong. It's not really true. That's the first. So what should we do about it? Like, again, educate people, educate the public. And the second question is, can you compare, just briefly, ChatGPT with Bard? Is there a difference? Or the approach is different, not just the outcomes, the developers' approaches, things like that. Thank you.
Yeah, on the Bard question, I honestly don't know much about Bard. If I understood correctly, if I remember correctly, it's based on ChatGPT, right? And they added, this kind of cross references so that you can go and try to have links. But I don't know what the situation is with Bard. It was quite a big fiasco, right, when they launched it.
Right.
They had, and they had to actually limit the number of questions that people could ask per day, which was quite embarrassing.
It's like Google versus Bing search engines kind of thing. I mean, that reminds me, like using, Bing using, is that Google?
Yeah. So Bing, they had that. No, but there was also a conversation. So a New York Times reporter had a conversation where Bard went crazy and started kind of gaslighting him and saying really strange stuff and very inappropriate stuff. And it was published on the New York Times. It was a very long conversation that they published. And a lot of people started to show how it included reference to web pages that didn't say what it was actually citing. And and at that point, a lot of people started making fun of this and they kind of reduced the number of questions you could ask. I don't know where it's at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the underlying technology, it's supposed to be based on GPT 3.5, I think. So it wasn't ChatGPT. But I would guess they're all rather similar in the architecture, the underlying architecture, especially because also Bard is the Google one. I've all this time I've basically made the mistake. Yeah, Bing Chat, that's the one I was referring to. Yeah, sorry. All this fiasco was Bing Chat. Yeah.
I see.
That uses ChatGPT. Yeah. So when you're asking about Bard, that's the one that belongs to Google. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So you can forget all I said. So the Bard one, I don't know much, but I would say that it's probably quite similar in the way it works because all these companies, they based their technology in this transformer architecture that was so successful, right? And I would expect variations of the same thing. I don't think there's anything too different, right, between them.
Right. Oh, one thing I actually noticed, you talk to other colleagues, with other people in your industry. It seems that that businesses are kind of holding their breath and waiting to see if ChatGPT and all these other automation will work for them instead of hiring people. So I don't want to speak for everybody, but the kind of atmosphere that I learn is that there are not much work going on for example, some translators, like unless you already have big clients. So that
Right.
is so my big accounts are okay, but the random work, that's the case with
Yeah.
me too. They kind of stopped. So I don't think the entire work will go away, but my impression is maybe again the businesses are waiting, kind of they want to see everything, the dust settles down and where they are, and then they will
Yeah.
decide, hire people again. Is
I
that
guess
what the
yeah.
impression you get?
I don't know. I guess we'll see in a year. But I get what you're saying. I actually read a very good article yesterday about translation. And I'm giving a talk about this in August in France. It's an event organized by translators, and they invited me to speak about all this. And there will be like a debate on AI. So I'm trying to read about that stuff. I get what you mean. So look, there was an article on the Telegraph here in the UK listing the professions that pay the least after, I don't know if it's after 5 years from your graduation. And I think being a translator was one of the tasks that paid the least. So it's already, yeah. So it was within the top 5, I think. So it was about 20K pounds that people are making after 5 years in the profession. So it's already a little bit in crisis, the field, I think. And I get what you mean. Yes, I maybe some people will hold back, and there will be changes. And I think it's very hard to resist any of this. And you were mentioning before the common people, not businesses, right? Just normal people, how they may be okay with good enough. And so I don't know if that's going to happen, but I think it's very difficult to try to do anything about that, right? Because you end up being a Luddite in a way. You end up being this person that says, they've tried, they try, sometimes they try to prevent people from texting with abbreviations and stuff, and people still did it, right? And they're not necessarily wrong for doing it, right? Because their lives become easier, maybe. But I think, for some things, I think the market will punish a lot, like, consumers of content, they are more picky than what we think, right? When you look at the TV shows that become really popular, they're TV shows that had an immense production behind, a lot of thought behind, right? And when a show is not very well written, people tend not to like the show. So I think they are better judges of good content than what we think. Right. And as I was saying before, people are going to Reddit for answers because they don't trust blogs anymore. So they're already punishing those those web pages.
I mean, after every revolution, I'm talking about industrial revolution, a lot of jobs went away. So it's not like we can just hold on to what we have and be okay. So you have to shift and change with the systems transition. I totally get it. It's just that there's a lot of uncertainties, of course, and we're living in a very interesting time. Maybe everybody has lived in such a time, but so I think we need to perk up our ears, basically pay attention what's going on, and try to sift what's gold from rock, just things like that. So it's just that I don't believe that going Luddite is the solution. Some people are that way, stay away from everything. But then at least even if you don't use it, like I haven't touched ChatGPT, but I try to be informed about it. So I think perhaps that's what we try to do.
If you're informed, you can be strategic about it. If I were in the translation profession, maybe I would try to focus or specialize on a topic that I think is going to be immune to the advancements of ChatGPT, for example, right? Because there's certain areas where
Right, and the garbage in, garbage out. That's a famous. I know that's used in the data industry, but it works in the copywriting too, or translation. If your source text is bad, you can never have a good target text. And if you just just feed this poorly written original source text into Google Translate or whatever, or ChatGPT, it won't work. And that's what I actually get in, or me and other people, like specializing, because it requires a human brain and a lot of research to find out, to figure out what this poorly written text is trying to say.
I know. I read a phrase yesterday in this report that said, it was specifically about literary translation. It said, translators, we don't translate what the text says, we translate what the text does, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
And I found it very clever, right? Yeah, because you kind of need to figure out what it does, which is, ChatGPT just translates what it says. But yeah.
It doesn't know the intention,
The intention. But I think there will need to be, maybe these industries will need to do a lot of education to the market to try to explain to business people why they need a human. What do you guys do? In the past, when there wasn't an automated translation, you just had to hire a translator. Now you need to know why you need to hire a translator and not use ChatGPT. And I think it might be the responsibility of translators to do that, or copywriters, to say.
Yeah. The translation industry has changed a lot, apparently. 30 years ago, people hired secretaries to dictate their translation. But these days, we are all more or less, very power users of our computers and, certain software applications. So I guess we'll just keep changing along with the world.
You can't fight it. You need to adapt, right?
Right.
I think also when it comes to work, I think a lot of people think they don't understand what work means in the economy. So people don't work because a robot can't do it. That's not the reason we work. The reason we work is because we exchange our efforts with one another, right? It's the economy in a world with limited resources, right? Because energy is not infinite, so we start exchange. So, and that's why a lot of things have been automated, but there's always new jobs that come up, and that's going to be the case forever, basically. And ultimately, humans, we're very, efficient thermodynamically. So the way we use energy is very, very good compared to computers. So ultimately, there are certain things that we can do at a much more efficient way than digital.
Yes, we are very adaptable. So I think we need to think for ourselves. A lot of people, sometimes including myself, we just want to go with the flow because it doesn't require much effort, because we're inherently lazy. But I think when we start thinking about what's going on, and then we will come up with solutions individually, also, society-wise.
But that's why I think it's great to know the facts about AI, understand how it works, because that's how you can properly address this.
Right. That's why I came to your this.
If you follow the hype, you may make the wrong decision. Like I saw people saying, I gave up on, as I said before, I gave up on being a software engineer now that ChatGPT exists.
Right.
That's a very ill-founded conclusion.
Well, but if you are that rash in a way, not thinking clearly, maybe engineering is not a job. Being an engineer is not a job.
Maybe not.
Sorry. Sorry, but
yeah.
On the stuff for the consumer stuff you were talking about, and for entertainment, TV, film, there's a growing people who complain about things being cookie cutter and by committee. This is unrelated to AI, and that's been a growing thing for years. You hear it about Marvel. And usually stuff that is unique or innovative is rewarded significantly now for that when something's a bit different. So if media or entertainment keeps flooding the market that's sort of AI driven, will that not just be exacerbated further when something different away from that made by humans is made? That's probably going to be rewarded significantly by the market. That's what my view anyway.
Exactly. No, I agree with that. Yeah, I think, especially if people are already feeling that a lot of stuff is cookie cutter, and AI generated stuff would even be worse because it's just regurgitating, right?
Can only use what's been made, doesn't it? It can't innovate.
Yeah. No, not really. Some religious AI fanatic will tell you that it can innovate or do things a little bit out of the box, but it won't design a super good plot line for a show. Original one for sure. I don't think so.
No.
I'm glad that you use the word regurgitation. That's what it is. Regurgitate in different, millions of different ways. So, putting all these images and, AI, created this painting. No, it picked these elements and it just kind of, assembled it in its own way, whatever it was, fed to do. So people should not think that the AI is going to create something new out of nowhere. It's not that. But
there's copyright issues as well, isn't there? The image generated stuff. There's already stuff going on, isn't there, with companies or people who feel their art's been lifted by the AI.
Yeah. The thing is, like, those systems that generate images, for example, right? They pick images and they create a representation internally again, so they don't copy the images. But sometimes the computer is kind of free to find the best representation, and in some cases, it's just kind of copied the image. So we see, I think it was Midjourney, this image generator that created images that are almost exactly the same as input images they received, and they did not seek approval, to copy them. So that's going to create some issues legally, I think. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And it's going to be a hot topic, I think, the legal question of the copyright question.
Yeah, well, watch this space, I guess, on that. But yeah, I think we'll wrap the session up here because we're running nearly 2 hours now. But I'm sure Emmanuel will be open to further questions if you reach out.
Absolutely.
The session's recorded as well, so I can send that around 20. But thanks everyone for attending. Big appreciation to you as well, Emmanuel, for taking the time out to organise the session. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you. Thanks for the invitation. Yeah, and for the interest. Yes.
No worries. All right.
Yeah.
Cheers, guys.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye.